Hey everybody, we're Shayem and Chris, and this is Fan Team Radio. And we're back after a pretty long break, wouldn't you say, Chris? We just finished up Coda. What's going on?
Yeah, the break, we just discussed this a minute ago, but they don't need two summer breaks because this break I forgot F1 was a thing for a minute. I was like, what is going on? Like, this is lasting forever. So it's good to be back, though, to the end of the season. And, I don't know why they're jam-packing the last three sprints and the last couple races, but another sprint weekend, which I've decided definitively that I just don't like. Kind of spoiled the race for me a little bit because we've got like a foreshadowing of the things to come, which would have been so much more exciting in the Grand Prix. But overall, good weekend and a few fireworks between Max and Lando.
I tuned in to the sprint race just to say that I watched it. I don't remember what the hell happened, if I could be quite honest, man. Like, it was literally like, I'm in Austin and I could care less about the sprint race. It's just not where it needs to be still.
What sucks is like this sprint was actually kind of interesting. Like Sainz was aggressive the entire time against Charles, and it made it for like this exciting, like we're going to get wheel to wheel racing and Coda. But at the end of the day, like I'd rather that just be the Grand Prix. And I know we've talked offline about a million different ways that the sprint could work. And ultimately, I just don't think it's a good product.
I mean, I think you hit it on the head. Just simply put, like we've put this to the test multiple times in both optimistic sense and a pessimistic sense, and it just keeps going back to pessimism. Like the format isn't really doing anything. It's just just like slotting in a little bit of a race experience for fans to, I guess, to get more eyeballs on this. But like, there's enough eyeballs on the sport. It's not like you're having to vie for a position in an entertainment anymore. You're pretty established as a product that's F1. I just don't. This just seems to weaken the entire product. I think you hit it on the head. It's just not a good product. We've talked about alternatives to this, putting in test drivers, reserve drivers, doing, a reverse grid, something, this just isn't it. And the fact that they have points from the sprint that bleed into, or contributes to the overall constructors championship, it doesn't coalesce. Like it just seems like, you're taking something that doesn't have a whole lot of gravity to it and rewarding drivers for doing well in that space and taking away. I don't know, it feels like it's cannibalizing. I don't know, man. I just never really was a fan of this format of the sprint race. I don't want to spend too much time on it because all I'm going to have to say is that I don't like it.
Yeah. I mean, can you imagine like a baseball playoff series where they're like, hey, we're going to start with like a 4-inning game and then we'll get to the 9-inning games next, tomorrow. And it's just like, it just doesn't do anything. I don't know. It's not a good.
I mean, is this your way of slotting in your Dodgers going to the World Series?
I wanted to say go Dodgers to the World Series. Hell yeah.
Yeah.
But
I mean, it just doesn't make sense. It's ass backwards. It potentially puts drivers and cars at risk when they don't really need to be. I
think that's the problem. Is the fact that it does put drivers and cars at risk. So like, even though Carlos did drive aggressively, I mean, ultimately you have quali a couple hours after the sprint race. So if you bin your car and put it into the wall,
you're going to whole weekend.
Like you can't so nobody can drive at 100%, and they're basically just trying to learn. No one's going to fight with the top contenders. It doesn't make any sense. We've talked about it ad nauseum again, and also the format's just not consistent across the year. There's only so many sprints, so from weekend to weekend, the way that you approach it is just so vastly different. long story short, even when it's good, it's bad. So the fans don't
Yeah,
like it, the drivers don't like it.
I don't like
So
it.
get rid of
Yeah.
it.
All right. Let's pivot into the actual race. So, exciting race, especially in the second half. I think there was fights going from top to bottom of the grid. Starting with that first kind of off the line move that Charles was able to make. Even then, Lando went wide right going into turn one. Kind of got into a scuffle with Max, and that set the tone essentially for their race throughout the entirety of the race. It gave way for Charles to actually, I think he had a slower off the line than both Verstappen and Norris, but I think it worked in his favor because he kind of let them kind of cannibalized each other, took the inside line, got into a great position, just never really looked back. And it also helped Carlos, stay, I guess he kept that aggressive tone from sprint going into the race, and it helped him a lot. But then it came down to the final few laps, Chris. So we'll just start there. We'll kind of start from the backwards and go work our way forward. So from laps 47 to about 53, it's a close neck on neck battle between Verstappen and Norris. Probably some of the best racing I've seen all year. And
Yep.
the gap is anywhere from like zero point 0.5 seconds at most to Norris eventually overtaking Max, and then Max coming back to take over Norris. Verstappen's not putting a toe out of line. He's playing that racing line like a champ. And then in lap 52, finally Norris uses the DRS to overtake Max going into, I believe, what was it, which turn was it, Chris? Was it like turn two or something? I forget which turn it was, but
I
uh,
think turn 12 is where
turn
it
12,
happened.
sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
So he goes to the right outside line. Max gets to the apex, or whatever you consider the apex to be, with his nose ahead, and then Norris just runs out of space. Max essentially makes his car the width of the whole track he takes over, and it was actually quite impressive to see Max essentially take over the entirety of the lane there. He did it within the bounds of the FIA regulations. Again, I'm not a Max fan. I'm not a Norris fan, so I feel like I have a pretty objective view on this right here. Um, I think Verstappen was in the right. I think he maintained his position at the apex. Norris went off bounds. You know, Even though he had nowhere else to go, he could have always slowed down and tried to recover that place later on. But he took, he took the track position over Max, and then just kept it, risked the penalties, and later on got the 5-second penalty for it. So I think Max was in the right. I don't think Norris was in the right. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I tend to lean and agree with your approach on this. I think Max totally, um, he's aggressive and he always has been. He has a reputation for it. I don't necessarily think he did anything too wrong in this situation. They're going to race hard and they're going to race aggressive. And when they're going back and forth like this, not only do you have to like make sure you hit the apex and hit your braking points, but also avoid a collision, but you're also racing hard because you don't want to give up position. And Max is a master at putting his car where he needs it to be. That being said, you can't, when you're racing that hard, it's going to be difficult to keep it completely on track. Your car is going to go a little bit wide where you're going a little bit faster. So the only part of me that's a little hesitant is to say that this is more of a racing incident and it doesn't necessarily deserve a penalty, only because they both went off track and they both were racing hard. So I almost feel like it is what it is in this situation. The thing where I think that McLaren went really wrong with it was just fighting so hard that Max was in the wrong and that Lando was somehow ahead at the apex, which very clearly he wasn't by every camera angle. He just like wasn't ahead at the turn. So if I was Lando, given the fact that I knew that I had the pace advantage on the Red Bull, because that was very clear, I'd just give the position back and then pass him again next lap. I just
I mean,
think
they had
it's
three. They had about 4 laps at that point, and Verstappen was reportedly having issues with the hard tires. He even said it himself on the radio. So I mean, I guess there's an argument to be made that the rules itself is at fault. That Max isn't at fault. That Norris isn't at fault. It's just the rules and how the FIA regulates, or kind of dictates what the apex is. And that's a fair argument, right? Like, what constitutes the apex of that turn? Is it going to be like the tippy top of like the corner, or is it going to be like the opposite end of where that corner, like, you know what I mean, like when it bends, like, is it going to be the opposite corner where the car needs to be? But in either definition of that, Max is ahead in this particular instance.
That brings up a really good point. What you're saying about the rules and defining the apex, like in all of, not all, I don't want to say all because I don't want to be definitive like that, but in most other sports, when you have a rule set and a rule book, like for instance, you're going to do offsides in soccer or what constitutes a goal in soccer, you can actually freeze frame that line and say, here's the other player. Was the other player ahead of this when the ball is on the other side? Or did 100% of the ball across the line? And you can actually freeze frame and draw a computerized line. There's no definitive line that defines the apex in Formula One, just like you were saying. Maybe that's what they need to do. Maybe they need to go to a turn and they need to put a little dotted painted line, and then if there's rules that say if you're ahead of the apex or not at the head of the apex, they can go back to the footage and review Max's nose is ahead at the apex, and they can clearly see that.
So two things there, right? It would be fascinating to see what the driver's reaction, how they would change their driving if they saw a definitive line on the ground. That would be fascinating. I would love to see how their reaction would change to that, because then at that point there is no arbitrary nature to it. It's right there in front of you, right? So right. That would be fascinating too. Second thing is, to use your soccer example more, other sports have the benefit of stopping, right? Sports racing don't really have that benefit unless there's a yellow flag, which there was today, and for unfortunate reasons for my boy Lewis Hamilton. But beyond that point, it would, playing devil's advocate here, I want to see if in the time between when that turn took place and when the FIA or the race stewards, kind of, administered that 5-second penalty, what was their thought process there? How did they determine that was definitively a 5-second penalty for Norris? Because if they went back to the I guess the back room or whatever, had a commentator explain hey, here's the FIA's decision. They actually determined the apex of the turn is right here, and then show us a replay of where the line is and who crossed first. Something, that would at least help us kind of as the viewer understand what's the reasoning behind this. Because every time the FIA does this, they just put themselves in a hole, right? They just keep presenting themselves as this invisible hand that's kind of guiding. And anytime you're considered the invisible hand, it's never a good thing. Right. It's usually a bad thing. So one, I would be incredibly interested to see what a driver's reactions would look like if there was a definitive line on the ground dictating the apex of a turn, especially with aggressive drivers like, Fernando and Verstappen, and I guess now fucking Lando. But on the other side of this, without keeping things behind iron curtains, I would love to understand what the deciding factors were when the stewardesses essentially administered their penalties, right? So even though racing doesn't have the same benefits of stopping or doing a timeout just to do a replay like football or basketball or soccer does, at least you can explain to us after the fact, or as real time as you can get it to be, why they decided to come to that decision. So I don't blame Max in this instance, because clearly it's been working for him for every single time. He's going to get the benefit of the doubt there. And with Norris, like you said, Chris, if he has a pace, I wouldn't say a pace advantage, because at that point they're still kind of going neck and neck, but then it was seemingly they did have a slight pace advantage, and Max's tire degs were also in play. I would have just kind of slowed down, let him take the place, and then just try to gain back the position within the 4 laps.
Yeah, like that's the one thing about the sport that I don't like to see what's happening, which has happened in too many other sports, is just trying to utilize the rule book and like bitching to get your way. It's like, I'm going to go ahead and then I'm just going to bitch over the radio and complain. And I think I'm right. And you know that the other team's going to do the same. So I just don't like flopping in soccer. I don't like flopping in any sport. I don't like this, like calling the stewards.
I
Just
love
like,
flopping in soccer. It's so fun.
dude, by the way, random, just completely random. Did you see that? I didn't know this whole like college football flopping epidemic thing that's going on. And did you see that? What happened in that game where they like bring a player from the sidelines and he just falls
Oh
over?
yeah, oh
Like,
yeah.
what is going
They,
on in
they, they,
sports?
they played the rules, man. They played the rules.
That's what I'm saying is I don't like this whole rules gamesmanship, you know?
Rules got to be airtight, man. That's why that's why you're getting paid to make rules airtight.
I guess so. But yeah, like ultimately, I think Norris could have just given the position back. He would have eventually passed him on track. I did think he had a pace advantage, and I think it was just too risky. That being said, my ultimate decision is I think there needs to be one of two solutions. Either put spikes or gravel traps at every big turn and nobody can go off track, otherwise they're hosed, or just let these guys race. Like, I'd rather watch hard racing without every time somebody races hard that we know that there's going to be some sort of like penalty or lookup or whatever. Like, when you're racing hard, eventually something's going to happen where like you run off track. It's just part of the sport. Like, and I just think ultimately these guys just want to race. They need to race. And if no one's doing anything totally egregious, then it is what it is. But, whatever. Moving on. Ultimately, like I said, I don't think Max is at fault here. It's probably more the rule set. But I think, Norris and McLaren probably handled this a little poorly.
Yeah. Let's turn our attention to Fernando Alonso, who, in a race where there's battles going up and down the grid, he exemplified what I would say father time catching up finally.
Yeah.
Colapinto and Lawson put it to him this weekend, and I think even the commentators, Alex Jacks, was like, it must be frustrating for Alonso to have to kind of put up with these newcomers, coming and testing him. He got overtaken by Lawson in lap 6. He was struggling to kind of keep up with Colapinto. By lap 32, Colapinto was already clearly ahead of him. It just was a tough day for Alonso, but I want to use it more as a foundation for kind of talking a little bit more about Colapinto and Liam Lawson, the two newcomers on the grid. Chris, I have this thought that when you're in seat for so long, a la like a Valtteri Bottas or even a Hamilton right now, you maybe just rest on your laurels a bit too much, and that's just a natural human thing, right? Like, I think at a certain point you just don't have the same amount of fire, even though you have like the mechanics to drive just as well as a younger driver. I think there's something about like the lawlessness, no pun intended, the nature, the lawless nature of young drivers, that they can just kind of put the pedal to the metal. And we saw Yuki do this too when he first started. That just allows them to overtake in certain instances where maybe more tenured drivers would be a little bit more conservative. And I think that was not maybe the entire case for Colapinto and Liam Lawson, but it definitely was a big factor in their ability to kind of maintain positions in the top 10 this weekend. Where do you think that these guys are going to go, Lawson and Colapinto? If you were to kind of play out their story, knowing what you know right now about them, I was up playing this exercise. Like, what do you think is going to be the roadmap for these guys?
Yeah, I mean, just touching on what you said a minute ago, like, I think this race very evidently showed us like the next generation of F1. And, these guys are young and hungry. and aggressive. And just like you said about people like Alonso and Lewis, they're kind of set in their ways. They've kind of proven themselves already. Even guys like Valtteri, who, aren't going to ever be a WDC, but, have 10 race wins under their belt, have raced for the best in the league. Like, they don't have to fight for their future anymore. They have experience as a value set. They have, they're not going to crash the car. They understand how a team operates and everything like that. And that's their value. The value of these young guys is no fear. They're super hungry and they want it more than anybody. And so they're going to try to push that car to the limit, which is what breeds people like Lewis Hamilton in the future. And, I think Alonso said it best to himself like a long time ago, which is, I knew he'd break because he has a wife and 2 kids at home. It's like, these older guys, they're going to play a little bit more conservatively because, hitting the wall hurts. And the older you get, the longer recovery takes, and, just things of that nature. So I definitely think that the polarizing difference between Liam Lawson and Daniel Ricciardo is already showing itself. I don't think Danny Rick would have had the same weekend that Liam had here. And, he kind of made Yuki Tsunoda look a little bad because you could tell Yuki was being upset and aggressive at the fact that Liam might have been outperforming him. And so I think Liam's like going to secure the seat in the V-Carb 100%. I think he had a really good showing in his first stint in F1, and now he's already had a great showing in this first race back. So I think as long as he keeps up a pattern here, he's going to lock in that seat for next year. And then as much as I hate saying this, and it really rubs me the wrong way every time I say it, even though I like the guy so much, because he's really a really cool kid already. And I think Franco Colapinto is going to nap that last Audi seat over Valtteri Bottas. Like, I don't want Valtteri to go off the grid, but it's just hard to not like this Colapinto kid. And I think he's got a good future ahead of him. So him not being in F1 next year just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. The only thing that I could see is that Colapinto, gets some sort of permanent role at Williams until he can replace Alex Albon. Because he might, he's making flares in the sport. And I think one team 100% is going to want to get him under their belt for either next year or 26 for sure.
Yeah, it's always going to be up to James Vowles to kind of get, I guess lease him to another team. But I'll start with Liam. I've been a Liam fan since last year when I first saw him appear on the grid. As sad as it is to see Daniel depart, especially in the way that he had to with VCarb, I was always of the mind that was a seat that belonged to Liam and that he really deserved. I'm glad to see that it wasn't a fluke, right? Because there's definitely that fear with younger drivers that they come in and kind of just underperform severely, and their initial showing isn't exactly kind of an accurate depiction of what kind of skills they have. But that's I still have Franco on kind of like my keep an eye on him, list. I think he's had a really solid showing the first couple of stints that he's been at F1, but I think confidently can't say that he's going to be a outstanding driver. Especially with Ollie Behrman coming in next year, I just want to see like the pool of young drivers across all different. Same goes for Jack Doohan, right? Like I want to see if he's any good, if he can at least even put the Alpine in a P9, P10 position every now and again, right? So I just want to see like what these young drivers are like, because Franco is relatively newer to kind of the young driver craze that's been going on recently, set by Liam Lawson last year, in my opinion, or maybe even a little bit further back, Oscar Piastri. But Piastri was a little bit of no man's land this week. I think I think what I would like for Liam Lawson is for him to just stay at VCarb for at least next year. I know there's going to be this narrative where they're going to try to pull him into Red Bull because they're there's no separation of church and state with those two teams, even though they try to say that they're not helping each other out. Red Bull 100% gets the benefit of all the fruit that is produced at VCarb. That's just how it is. And I think it would be a really bad move to put Liam in a Red Bull seat, not because I don't think he can't perform, but because I don't think he could perform at a level where Helmut Marko is going to give him, any kind of like leeway. And I think that's what he kind of needs right now, and that's what he's going to kind of get with this V carb situation is the ability to make mistakes, because he will eventually make a mistake. He'll eventually have a streak where maybe he doesn't perform as well as his first outing show, and that's totally fine, right? Like Oscar Piastri did, he has P5 this week, but we're not saying that he's a terrible driver by any means. It's just you have off weeks, especially when you're a young driver, and I don't. That pressure has a different complexion at VCarb than it does at Red Bull. So I think that having Liam in seat at VCarb for the next year does well for him, does well for the VCarb organization, and I think in a way also helps Yuki sharpen his edges a little bit more even. And right now, Red Bull is a bit of a dumpster fire. Like I think Red Bull is better served trying to poach maybe or keep Sergio in seat and maybe poach another D2 driver while they're waiting for their car to come back up to par. Maybe even waiting till that 2026 season when everyone's going to be back on even footing. That's my hope for Liam's future, is to organically let him grow through the ranks in a way where the pressures of an organization like Red Bull aren't going to ground him down. Franco, I think they committed to Carlos, which I would too, right? Carlos is an amazing driver. No one knew that this kid Franco was going to come in and kind of kill it the way he did. Funny thing, Chris. So I went to the Williams pop up in Austin this past week. They had a bunch of pop ups all around town. It's crazy. And they had I got to see Jenson Button talk a little bit. I don't know why he. I mean, it was pretty badass. He was a Williams driver, so I guess I get it. But all the advertisements and like the flags and everything that they had all around their pop up had Franco and Alex, like no signs that Logan Sargent ever existed. And I was just like, this is kind of crazy how like quickly they can get all of this published and like just kind of outcast totally, the Logan Sargent narrative. I think they want to distance themselves from that as much as possible, and I think Franco's recent successes has helped him do that, right? So it's just something I wanted to kind of mention because it is something that I observed, and it was one of the first striking things about the Williams pop up shop. But for Franco, I think getting a seat at stake, barring the rest of this year, goes well for him. And what by well I mean anywhere from like P9 to like P12. If he can stay in that window consistently across the next couple of races, I think that there is a legitimate shot that he should get a seat at stake. If he falls off, I still think he's a good driver. I still think he should be given a shot as maybe a reserve driver at Williams, but I don't think he would be ready yet to put into that stake Sauber seat. With that being said, um, neither Valtteri or Joe, I feel like are as good as Franco right now. So I haven't really given a whole lot of thought to who else could take that stake Sauber seat. But I do know if Franco doesn't perform within that window, he shouldn't really be considered. I think it would be a detriment to him as well to be put into such a early development team that's just like completely shitting the bed, like without really caring a whole lot. That would be a way to kind of lessen his shine, I feel like. And so for Franco, I think if he stays in that P9 through P12 on average across the next couple races, put him in that stake Sauber seat. Let's just see what he's got. If he drops off considerably, keep him at Williams, keep him as a reserve driver. Carlos has maybe what is like a year to year contract, right? Or does he have a 2 year contract? Do you remember?
I actually don't know, but I think it's a multi-year deal. And then there's rumors that alludes to that he has like exit clauses if he wants, but I definitely think it's a multi-year deal.
Okay, so give it to like 2026. Franco's really young, right? I think he's like 21 or something like that. He's a fairly young kid. So you don't need to rush, right? When you have like a diamond like in the rough, like start like kind of chiseling away the rock around him. Don't put him storefront immediately. It's not going to do anyone any good, especially a young driver like that. I think the F1 as a whole should promote a culture of facilitating the growth of talented young drivers in a way that's like much more predictable, right? In a way that like actually gets them to the next level and helps them sustain, not kind of burn them out before they even had a chance to kind of shine. So yeah, those are my two ideal case scenarios for Liam Lawson and Franco Colapinto. But all that to say that Fernando Alonso had a tough week with those two on his hands.
100%. The last thing I'll touch to that is that the last piece of the puzzle on the grid, and I know he has a contract and there's been some controversy about back and forth, but Sergio is going to single-handedly give up potentially even P2 in the Constructors Championship for Red Bull. George Russell started this race from the pit lane while Sergio started P9, and George Russell finished ahead of him in the race, which is just so unacceptable from a Red Bull driver. So I really wish that there was a way they could find a replacement for Sergio. I don't know what the answer to that is, but he's just been so unexciting for
Bring back K-Mag. That's what I said.
Whatever, I'm down to put anybody in that seat right now. Put Mick Schumacher in there. I really don't care. I just want somebody different than Sergio. Even when he does well, it's just not exciting. Like nobody's rooting for him anymore. I guess the entire country.
We'll see in Mexico next week. But I'm the firm believer that Yuki deserves that seat, at least to test it out. In this era when they're not doing all that's hot, like.
I mean, I'm going to apologize, Yuki. I don't think, dude, put Valtteri Bottas in the seat. But
I'm not opposed to that either. But I do agree with you in terms of like Sergio. Just I don't think he just wants it as much as he let on even last year. I think once he got that 2-year deal, he kind of just put himself on autopilot.
Well, I think Max just took the like soul out of him when you find yourself in a Red Bull and you've been telling yourself ever since you were a little kid that you're going to be a world championship one day and you're finally in the best car on the grid, and then your teammate just makes you look like an amateur. Like that's got to just be soul crushing for most competitive people. It's completely understandable, but it's his age, his experience, the amount he's gotten out of the sport already. I think it's time to move on. Probably for a few people on the grid as well. Maybe Fernando. We'll see how Lewis performs at Ferrari. But definitely we're cusping on that transition of the next generation fully taking over. We seem to have lost our beloved Shayem from the podcast, so he is returning. Hey, welcome back to the podcast, Shayem.
Yeah, sorry about that. I disconnected for a bit.
Oh, good. Let's get into winners and losers then, since we had an unexpected transition point.
Yeah, that's the podcast gods telling us that we should move on. So let's start with winners. I think we got a couple of similar people on our docket, so we could go one by one, Chris. So we both had Charles Leclerc. Obviously, great off the line and just never looked back. The team really held us back too. We had sub 3-second pit stops for both Leclerc and for Sainz, which is what they needed. They got their pit strategy right. They undercut when they needed to. I think just a very cohesive race altogether for Ferrari, which led to a Leclerc P1 and a Carlos Sainz P2.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I'll touch on Leclerc is that, and I think you alluded to a little of this at the beginning of the podcast, which other drivers are starting to realize how Max handles, lap one, turn one. And when he takes those really wide outside lines and pushes people to the edge of the limit, it allows him to keep the lead and it allows him to maybe overtake from P2 to P1. But it's definitely inefficient from a speed standpoint. So as you said that Charles didn't get the 100% best launch off the line, that actually allowed him to continue pace throughout the turn and make that pass, because Lando and Max had to slow down a little bit to avoid collision. They're going off track. And, Charles just had that smooth line that allowed him to overtake. And I think other drivers are figuring out how to take advantage of the fact that Max is over aggressive. And I hope Ferrari continues to do that. And, it was a brilliant race by Charles, and Ferrari is within striking distance of taking constructors. It's definitely within possibility if they continue to 1-2 races, and Lando keeps having bad weekends, so we'll see. But overall, I put Sainz on there just because good race weekend overall with the sprint and the Grand Prix as well, being aggressive. Just overall, some really good racing. Just second to the Ferrari Wonder chosen. So, and then we talked ad nauseum about Franco Colapinto already. Good showing, good kid. Another point on the board for his Formula One career. But we'll keep him on the watch list, as you said.
Yeah, I think we also have Liam Lawson on the winner's circle. We talked a lot about him. I've been a big fan. You've been a big fan since last year. Now that, we're kind of getting over the grieving process of Danny Ricciardo leaving, we could hopefully, as a collective fan base, focus a little bit more on the talent that Liam Lawson is putting out there. Good kid, really good driver. And he's been consistent over the course of several races. So I'm starting to put a little bit more faith in his swagger. And then I also put Max up on the winner's circle. Like I said, man, that lap 47 to 52, the dude was driving like pitch perfect, and I think that it's just a testament to the fact that even when he doesn't have like the most outstanding car and he's at 100% pressure, he'll still do Max Verstappen shit, and I think that was fun to see. I mentioned, I'm not the biggest Max Verstappen fanboy, but that was really great to see him put Norris on skates.
Yeah, and when there was a graphic that they brought up in the middle of that battle that showed the comparison between their energy levels and the hybrid engines, and I think Lando's at the time was like 40 to 50% energy level, and Max's was like 80 to 90. And I knew that like Lando was trying to be over aggressive, expending too much energy. And I knew in that moment that it was just going to be so difficult for Lando to pass Max, because Max is conserving, his abilities to build a gap when he needs to. And that's just the Max Verstappen like expertise and experience behind it, that he was just doing what he needed to do to make sure that he could keep the race as tight as possible for as long as possible. And, brilliant driving. And also I think that, overall we saw that the championship just kind of might be over, barring some, really bad reliability issues or really bad tracks for the Red Bull. Because I think it's going to be very difficult for Lando to consistently massively outperform Max for the rest of the year. So I think the championship is kind of not mathematically, but unofficially locked up for Max this year.
Yeah, I think one other person I want to add to that winner circle, Chris, is Nico Hulkenberg.
Ooh.
Yeah, my man put in the best position the Haas has ever been at home at P8. Let's see here. He started, where did he start?
Hey, can we call it home anymore? Because now they're a Toyota company.
Yeah, but the owner's name is Gene. So
that's true.
It's the American fucking name in the world. But yeah, he started P12, worked his way up to P11 by lap 6. and just kept his head down, kept a really good race going. By lap 44, he was, I believe, in P7 before Russell passes him up, but he maintains a really good pace throughout the entire race. Eventually finishing at P8, Kevin Magnussen at P11, which it would have been cool to see Kevin get up in the points as well. To have both Haas's in the top 10 would have been really a special thing to see in Texas. But yeah, I'm gonna slot in Nico Hulkenberg is there as well. Like he's one of my favorites, and I can't wait to kind of see what he does as an old man leading a Audi unit next year.
As long as they get a different car other than the tractor they're driving now, otherwise he's going to look like another Botas this year, just driving around in last place.
Yeah, and that's probably what's gonna happen, which is a sad thing.
Come on, Mattia, do us a favor and build a better car.
Yeah.
I'll start out with the losers since I know you don't want to be too sad about your boy, but Lewis Hamilton obviously had a terrible weekend. I think the solace to it is that Toto came out and admitted that this is 100% a car error, which I'm actually very inclined to believe. A lot of the time, these answers are very PR, hand wavy, and just kind of BSing around. But I truly believe that whatever the upgrade that, or let's just call them updates, as we said in the past, whatever that was at this track just did not seem to work and allowed for whatever that turn where they went off just to lose all their downforce and have the rear slide out, because both incidents between Russell and Lewis were almost identical to the frame. And so I think the front wing that they brought just didn't work at that corner and just destabilized the car, and it was just completely not his fault. So unfortunate weekend for him. And I think that we saw that, Russell was forced to go off of the new update because he crashed and destroyed his update. So he reverted back to the old spec and then did very well on that spec while Lewis crashed out of the race. So the update clearly just didn't work. Coda had been resurfaced. Everything was a little bit different. I think the teams couldn't properly plan 100% because of that. And they just had an unfortunate incident that was car related. So tough weekend for him, but ultimately I think he can brush it off knowing it really wasn't his fault and, continue looking forward ahead to next year where he's not going to be in that Mercedes.
Yes.
By the way, I'm actually getting more and more excited for this Hamilton and Ferrari situation because we'll talk about Lando in a second, but I think even if Max were to leave the sport tomorrow, I think Norris would have a hard time being WDC, now with Charles and Lewis going to be in a Ferrari and then his teammate right alongside with him. I don't think it's a given that Norris would win without a Max on the field. So I'm super excited to see how this all shakes out. Again, still sad for Sainz, but I'm excited for this Ham and Red, especially since Red Bull seems to be falling apart. I'm going to need a new team.
Yeah. We both have Norris on our loser seat. I just don't like the cut of his jib. That's all I got to say about that. I'm glad that Max was able to bully him a little bit. I'm glad that Charles got the one up on him in the get go. I'm glad he had a frustrating race this weekend.
Yeah, I want to like the guy a lot.
I do.
I'm a big fan of young, hardworking talent and kind of generational wonder kids who put a lot behind it. Everyone's dedicated, but Norris just has this like the way he presents himself when there's adversity just kind of rubs me the wrong way. And he's always trying to pretend like he's taking the higher road when you clearly know the things he says over the radio and the things he does at the team are the opposite of things he says in the press box. And I just want you to be like Max was asked in an interview after the race about the incident, and Max was just like, don't really need to comment on it. I have my own thoughts, but the stewards will do what they do, and moving on. And it's like, just be like that. Just I don't know. Just Anyways, long story short, he had a bad, as many times as he can get P2, P3. I guess he got P4 in this race. It's very successful, but ultimately a bad weekend. And I think his championship for this year is behind him, and he's just going to ultimately have to accept that and move on.
I like saying Oscar Piastri had no comment on any of this. He just stayed cool and calm like a Kiwi. Love that.
I wish Oscar had taken that second out of him and made him get P5.
I'm saying, man, now that McLaren's has this like delayed response to getting full steam ahead, getting fully behind Norris, I'm like, I thought, I did have a thought. I was like, do I just not like McLaren? I'm like, I don't dislike McLaren. I like, what Zach was able to do because, this time was it a year or two ago, or early on the season last year, they were zeros. They were the laughing stock of. So to come back from that, that state of a team to what they are now, like I give a lot of credit to Zach and the organization, and I think the move to get Oscar was now you're seeing like the benefits of doing something like that, right? But I just don't like Lando.
I mean, I think we're going to see a change, next year if Oscar comes out of the gate strong.
I hope he does, man. I really hope he does.
Well, he's definitely going to have the experience, and there's a lot of people that talk him up on the grid as future WDC, and I truly believe that. So I think it's going to be a tough year for Lando if he thinks he's going to be a permanent D1 driver.
Yeah, I think this year's the best chance that he has to make that happen. But I also have Fernando Alonso in my losers bracket, right? I just think that he just got kind of tossed back and forth between two quote unquote rookies, especially rookies when you compare it to his tenure in the sport, and that spat that he got into with Lawson during qualifying and sprint races. That was quite funny to see. I love seeing that. But yeah, Alonso just didn't have a great race this week. He got overtaken quite a few times, not even by Colapinto and Lawson, but by other drivers as well. And he ended up, where was he? He ended up finishing P13 behind Pierre Gasly and Kevin Magnussen. I mean, that's just hard. It's just hard to kind of take in. He only finished 2 places above Lance Stroll, and you know how good Lance Stroll is. So yeah, it was just a tough weekend for Fernando Alonso. Hopefully, it's not something that he can't recover from. But yeah, let's look at hot seats. I think we have a couple of similar hot seaters. So let's start with Yuki Tsunoda. What did you make of his race?
Yeah, I mean, Yuki to me, honestly, like I just seemed like he was spending most of the race trying to prove that he was better than Liam Lawson. Obviously, if he wants a seat at Red Bull, he can't let the new rookie come in and be better than him. And ultimately, I think that's why he had the small little incidents that he did, is he was just pushing a little bit too hard, over the radio, also complaining about how, Liam was able to, outpace him, and was like, how did this happen? And it's like, focus on your race. And if you are better than him, then just be better than him. And I think Yuki has consistently improved over the last 3 years, but I ultimately don't think he is anything beyond, a Pierre Gasly and Esteban Ocon, just like a very capable, middle of the road F1 driver. Like obviously one of the best drivers in the world, but just not on that Max, Piastri, Charles, Sainz, whatever level you want, that next tier. So I put him on my hot seat because like he's going to be put to the test by Liam for the rest of the season, and I just have this prediction that he's not going to win that battle.
So I put him in my hot seat just for this week because of the fact that he, kind of fell short of Liam Lawson, and Liam Lawson kind of made him look pretty bad. When it comes to comparing him against Perez, I do think he has the advantage there, and the reason is he has staved off multiple different drivers to come into this team. Danny Rick, um, fucking Nick DeVries. Who else? I feel like I'm missing someone. But he's been put up against multiple drivers, and drivers that management at least seem to like more than they like him, and he's been able to just perform against them. Perez has been up against granted he's the world champion, but he can't even take a second. Like if you look at what Valtteri did with Lewis when they were at Mercedes and that era of dominance, Valtteri was able to play the sidekick incredibly successfully. He even
Right.
won several P1s when Lewis just wasn't able to finish a race, or Lewis was like having a hard race. Perez can't do that. I think at least Sonoda, if he had the car that Perez did uh, last year when they were so dominant, I think that Yuki would have done fantastic. He wouldn't have crashed at Mexico. I know for that much. You know, like so overall, like writ large, like I think Yuki Tsunoda is a good driver. I think he's in a better place to be a D2 driver for Red Bull than Perez is as it currently stands. But this week, Liam Lawson just kind of put him, in a place where it's just really hard. Like I think from like a quick glance, if you were just look at the numbers real quick, you'd be like, this you know, Liam Lawson is definitively a better driver. I think experience still takes, has a bit of merit to it, right? So I think Yuki, I'm gonna say he's in a place that is very redeemable. I'm not saying that he's outright, kind of in the hot seat forever, but at least for this week, I'm gonna put him in my hot seat.
Yeah, I'm
Um,
not going to disagree with that. But ultimately, even if he deserved it, like I don't think Yuki's personality would be fit for the Red Bull seat just because I don't think he would be a good D2 to Max. He would want to be number one. And
no,
this,
I agree. I disagree with you there. I think he'd shut up and fall in line. I don't think because I think because he's in a V carb organization where management just is kind of flimsy, right?
yeah,
They're one level removed from the Red Bull management, which allows him to kind of be a little bit more edgy or kind of more rambunctious. I think when he's nestled up against Max Verstappen, Helmut Marko, and Christian Horner, he's probably just going to shut up and drive.
we'll see. I'm not opposed to him getting the chance. Um,
Yeah, just a chance, Chris. Like not even like as a temporary fill-in. I think he would have done a much better job at that than and maybe maybe he earns his stripes, right? But at least for the temporary needs that they have to keep Ferrari and McLaren away from the constructors championship, I think he would have probably delivered better results than Perez.
100%. I agree with that. I'm going to put Botas on my hot seat as well, just because he is now 23rd out of 20 drivers in the Formula One championship. Um, I don't necessarily think it's totally his fault. I think that the car that they're given is just completely incapable of competing, even for back markers. So but he is 23 out of 20 on the list, which makes it look very bad for his future. And, he consistently, can't get out of Q1 and, ends up having bad races. I think most of the time he is finishing ahead of Joe. But I just don't know if it's going to be enough for his future. So I think it might be winding down to the end unless him and Mattia just have a good enough relationship and he needs somebody in that seat for next year. But unless the car's any different, I don't have high hopes anyways. But I think Botas, and I think he knows it as well. I think he publicly said that he's not sure if he'll be there next year. So we might be seeing these last few races of my favorite driver, but all good things must come to an end. And I think that we're seeing more and more of these young kids um, are gonna be the future, and I think time's running out for the Valtteri Bottas of the world, even if he does get a seat next year.
Yeah, I'll take one stake driver and raise you another stake driver. I think both of them are in my hot seat this week. Look, we talked about this really early on in the season, Chris. Like, what does stake have to fight for? Nothing. And when you're a team that has nothing to fight for, you either become a brawn and you fucking just nail it, or you become a stake sauber and you just meander and just kind of waste a spot on the grid. And I think you're seeing two drivers who aren't bad drivers. Like I mentioned earlier, Valtteri has had success in F1. Joe, I'm sure, other than the fact that he brings in a lot of personal money to the team, he's probably had success in other Formula categories as well. But when the organization is just kind of like there just to kind of show their logo to the world and as more of a marketing ploy than anything else, it's just it's a it's a hard position to be in. So I won't blame them too much, but I also blame them a lot. I think, yeah, being 23 out of 20 drivers is pretty. It's a pretty embarrassing position to be in,
Yep.
and I think they know it, and it's just a tough, you know, draw that they've had. They performed way better last year. I'll say that much. So they kind of just put themselves in a hole that they don't seem very interested to dig themselves out of. And I'm talking, by they, I mean the organization, not so much the drivers. I think the drivers are putting their life on the line, right? So to say that any driver isn't trying their best is, I think, a misrepresentation of F1 drivers. But even at their best, like, Joe spun out, lost his position. Valtteri just probably wasn't pushing the car as fast as he needed to. They're both just kind of in a hot mess right now. So I put both stake drivers in my hot seat this week. And then I'm also going to put Alex Albon in my hot seat. I think the way that Colapinto made Albon look in this week was more severe than how Liam made Tsunoda look this week, if that makes sense.
Yep.
And I say that because Alex is proven to be, and the narrative behind Alex is that he is a very capable and set of hands. Uh, and then you got to start scrutinizing what kind of drivers was he up against, right? Like the Logan Sargents of the world. Was he there when Nutella Boy was there?
No, I don't think so.
Okay,
No.
but so far his record has been kind of compared to Logan Sargent, which isn't a great marker at all. As I mentioned earlier, Williams has completely erased him from their history books if they can. So now you have someone like Colapinto come in and outdo you. So like not only is Colapinto making Alonso look bad, but he's making Alex Albon look bad. Alex Albon's still a young guy. Like he's probably someone considered to be in the prime of his career. So this is something that he needs to be able to rectify real quick. He's not in the position where he could be like, oh yeah, I'm going to be like a cool, like mature guy and help out the young. And not, like he needs to like fix his course and get back into a position where he's like, this is my team. Even when Carlos comes in, I want to be seen as his equal. I don't want to be seen as someone that loses my team to an incumbent and it's because this rookie outdid me this year. So I put Alex Albon in the hot seat this week. I hope he's not there for long, but definitely was a disappointing showing from him. And then crashing. I think he crashed into Ocon, right, or something like that. He didn't get a penalty for it, but still, like just sloppy driving.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think, like you said, he might have actually been there with Latifi. But if you're in a team with Latifi, Nick DeVries, Logan Sargent, you don't have a whole lot of competition, which not only makes you look worse because you're expected to beat them at all times, but if you don't have someone pushing you to the edge all the time, you might just get worse out of thinking that you're better when you're really not, and you're not improving because you have nothing to compete against. So Carlos might come in and, potentially make him look a little worse. And if it's anything like what Franco Colapinto was able to do in one race, it could be very bad for Alex Albon, but we'll see. He's got a multi-year deal. I still think he's a very good, capable driver. And I hope Williams can level up their car for the next couple of years and actually get up in the top of the midfield. But, Alex Albon, might be in that next generation of people who are going to have to move aside for, the Francos of the world. We'll see.
We'll see. Again, Franco still has some confidence gaining that he needs to do. I guess in terms of like the fans or myself personally speaking, he has still a couple of races that he needs to do to be able to kind of gain my confidence in him. But so far, so good. And I hope this sparks a fire underneath Alex's butt.
Yep. Well, glad to be back in F1. We have a couple races in a row, I think. Mexico and Brazil.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we'll finally get to learn next weekend if Sergio is going to retire after the Mexican Grand Prix. I don't think so, but
or crash after turn one.
I kind of been hoping that that's what happens.
I would actually be impressed. I'd be like, wow, like I'm not even mad.
Just a repeat of last year.
Burgundy. Yeah, I'm not even mad.
Maybe he'll go full Bottas Hungary and just like take out 5 cars in front of him, trying to get to P1.
It's going to be South America, so Mexico and Brazil back to back, and then we have about 3 weeks of nothing, and then after Thanksgiving we're going to be back in Qatar. What do you got? What do you think is going to happen for who's going to be a top 3 for Mexico? You think?
I'm going to go ahead and I think the Ferraris are going to do really well again in Mexico. I'm gonna put a repeat. You know what? I don't think they're gonna be able to master the 1-2, but let's go ahead and put Carlos Sainz up there on the top of Mexico.
I was just thinking that. Yeah. I was just thinking that. He speaks Spanish.
And I'll throw Max up on there in P2, and let's get Oscar back to form and put him in P3.
You know what? I don't disagree with that at all. I think that's a really solid prediction. I would probably switch out Oscar for George.
Yeah, I mean, like I've never been a big fan of George, but he has shown to be a very capable, talented driver. I think we all knew that even from when he was at Williams, but he's definitely showing some future promise. So him being on the podium would never be a shock or surprise. But I think you missed Vegas, right? We have Vegas at November 24th. Is that Thanksgiving weekend?
Let me see. I'm looking at the calendar. So we have Mexico next week. The race is going to be on the 27th. And then we have Brazil. The race is going to be on the 3rd. We have a break on the weekend of the 8th. We have a break on the weekend of the 6th of the 15th. And then you're right. You're absolutely right. Sorry. So yeah, on the 22nd we'll have the Las Vegas Grand Prix. Yeah.
That is Thanksgiving weekend, right? That's crazy.
That's right before Thanksgiving weekend, and then right after Thanksgiving is going to be at Qatar.
Ah, yes.
Yeah, so my mistake. Yeah, so we actually would have like a 2-week break after Brazil.
I think the championship is going to be decided in Vegas. So
I think so too.
F1's going to love that.
Yeah, we should go to Qatar this year, Chris. The tickets are probably going to be super cheap.
Yeah, absolutely. Book the flights tomorrow. But yeah, looking forward to it. Glad to be back. Good to see you again, Shayem. It's been too long, and sadly we didn't get to go to Dakota this year, but it was too crazy. Although I heard the Eminem concert was pretty fun. So
yeah, Eminem.
It
was good talking to you.
Yep. See you guys next week after the Mexico Grand Prix. Peace,
everybody.
Thank you for listening. Shayem and I would love for you to join the Fan Team Radio community. So please like, subscribe, or follow on your platform of choice, and we'll see you next time.